Hello.
Ooh.
Welcome, Sophie. We are
Hello.
honoured to have you with us at Twinkle as an honorary Twinkly tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My sister is a primary school teacher, so she was a little bit starstruck when I said that I was going to be coming and doing this. She was like, "You don't know how big that is for primary school."
Oh, love it, love it, love it. That's really cool. So we'll just give everyone like a few seconds to hop on, as I know there's sometimes a bit of a delay. But I was really happy when you replied to my email saying that you'd be interested in coming to do this for us, because I am a avid listener to your podcast. I've seen lots of your Facebook, your Instagram lives as well, and now I've taken loads from them. So I'm sure that everyone that's watching will take lots from this too. I've got my notebook ready. I feel you'd be proud. Do more of what makes you happy.
Definitely.
Very ready. It's definitely the notebook to have, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm loving this sort of like new school year energy of all of the notebooks being in the supermarkets and paper chase being fully stocked. It's I'm not going back to school, but it won't stop me buying new notebooks.
Absolutely. All the highlighters, all the fancy pens. Yeah, definitely. Gotta love the stationery. So I'll just do another little reintroduction for anyone that's just joined us. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening. I hope your school week is going well so far. Some of you might have even been back today with your children for the first time. So for those of you, I hope it's gone really, really well. It's all very exciting in September, but I know how exhausting it can be. So well done if you're still awake at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday. You're doing really, really well. So we've arranged this live with the fabulous Sophie to bring you lots of positive September vibes, and I know she'll have loads of amazing tips for you. If you haven't heard of Sophie already, do make sure you check out her podcast, Practical Positivity. It's definitely a good one for listening to on the drive to work. It'll put you in a good mood for when you arrive. So if you're ready, Sophie, I will hand over to you. I think with the power of tech, I might disappear from the screen, but hopefully I will reappear at the end for any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hayley, and thank you, Twinkle, for having me. So, as Hayley just mentioned, my name is Sophie Cliff, and I'm also known as the Joyful Coach. And I just wanted to start by giving you a little bit of an introduction into who I am and the type of work that I do. So, I'm a qualified coach, and I'm also a recently qualified positive psychology practitioner after completing my master's in positive psychology earlier this summer. And essentially, everything that I do, the main thrust of my work is helping people to live their most joyful lives, whatever that means to them. And I always put lots of emphasis on the whatever that means to them part of that statement, because I think it can mean something different to all of us. And we'll talk a little bit about that this evening. I also feel like I should caveat that I can't play any of these instruments behind me. I'm just married to a musician. People often think that I'm much cooler than I am and that I'm in a band or something, but unfortunately I just share an office space with my husband who's a musician, and can't actually play any of them. So if any of you are sitting there thinking, oh, I wonder why she's got all of those guitars, that is the reason why. So what are we going to talk about this evening? I was really happy when Hayley invited me along to join you guys this evening, and to join you at this time of year as well, as you are getting into the swing of a new school year. I mentioned a little bit earlier on when we joined the call that my sister is a primary school teacher, and so I know firsthand, I've seen up close just how much goes into starting this new school year, planning for it, getting into the swing of things, and just how exhausting it can be. And so what I hope with this evening is that we can spend a little bit of time reminding you to take some time for you, giving you some practical ways to do that, helping you to really reconnect with what is going to bring you joy. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to start by thinking a little bit about how our minds work, and understanding some of the ways that our minds work. And that can then help us to see how the importance of positivity and joy, and how our mindset can really impact our day-to-day experiences. And then I'm going to give you some tools and ideas, some practical things to really help you keep prioritizing joy as you move through this new school year. And most importantly, helping you avoid burnout, because I know how rough you guys have had it the last couple of years, how much change you've had to adapt to, how much extra time and love and care and work you've had to put into keeping things running for your pupils, your communities, your classrooms. And so I wanted to make sure that we're thinking about how you can take a little bit of time for yourselves and make sure you're not burning out in the process of that as well. If you've got any questions as we go, please feel free to pop them in the chat box and we will make sure that there's some time at the end to answer any of those. So, what I wanted to start with is thinking a little bit about why joy is so important. Like I said, my name is the Joyful Coach. Everything I do within my business is about helping people to live their most joyful lives. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, why is it important? Surely when we're all so busy and we've got so many other responsibilities and things we need to worry about, surely joy isn't something that should be at the top of our to-do lists. But what the science and the research in this field says is that actually it's really, really important. And there is lots and lots of research that backs up the associated benefits of joy. And I wanted to just run through some of those now. So, first of all, there is lots of research showing that joyful people tend to be healthier. So joy can improve our health. There are studies that show the more joyful you are, the less chance of having a heart attack you will have. It has been shown to lower our blood pressure, reduce cholesterol. There's even some studies that show um, some cool studies where they sort of looked at key biomarkers of people recovering from surgery, and people who reported being happier and feeling more joyful recovered more quickly. So it's really good for our health, essentially. It can help to improve our relationships, and I think this really makes sense because positive people tend to be kinder, tend to be more compassionate, we tend to be less envious, we communicate better. It improves our chances of success. And I think that this is a really cool one. This is where the research sort of challenges some of our common thinking. Often we think that the more successful we are, the happier we will be. And so we prioritize that success in the short term because we want to get to feeling happy and feeling joyful. But what the studies show is that actually, if we prioritize happiness and joy, we tend to have more successful careers. So joyful, happy people tend to do better at work than those who don't identify as joyful or positive. And finally, and I think most importantly for the environment within which we are all living today, is that joy helps to improve our resilience. So positivity supports adaptability, it supports problem solving, it supports improved cognitive functioning. It essentially helps us cope better with everything that life is throwing at us. And I think, like I say, given everything that has been thrown at you guys in the last couple of years, this feels really important. Joy can be a really great way of improving that resilience and making sure we can cope better with whatever life throws at us. So, I wanted, like I say, to talk a little bit about how our minds work, because I've just talked there about the importance of joy and the importance of positivity. But actually, as humans, we are wired to focus on the negative. And it would be interesting to know in the chat box if this feels true to any of you guys, if it feels easier to focus on the negative sometimes. And I want to, if you do feel that way, I want to let you know that that isn't a flaw in our thinking. You aren't doing anything wrong by focusing on the negative, by worrying, by planning for things that might go wrong. It's actually how we are wired. You might have heard, when we're talking about how humans have evolved, you might have heard the phrase survival of the fittest. What lots of research in neuroscience is starting to show at the moment is that actually it might have been that it was the survival of the most negative. So, of course, we needed to be fit and we needed to be able to run and, outrun threats and take care of ourselves. But another thing that has helped us to evolve is being skilled risk assessors, being able to think about what might go wrong. If you think back to when we were cave people, if you were just constantly always optimistic, you might walk into danger, you might do things that put your life at risk. So we have evolved to really spot risks, to think about where things might go wrong so that we could avoid those risks. And the humans who did that way back when were the ones who survived and the ones who passed their genes down. Hence why now in 2021, we often find it easier to imagine the worst case scenario rather than the best case scenario. This is sometimes referred to as a negativity bias. So, this is the idea that we have a cognitive bias in our brain that means that we give more weight to the bad stuff than we do to the good. And there isn't an exact formula here, but some research suggests that we give, a, let me get my words right, we give almost 3 times as much focus to negative stuff or weight to negative stuff than we do the good. And we know this, right? Because if I asked you about the last piece of negative feedback you had received, you could probably tell me where you were, what you were wearing, how long you spent on the phone to your mom or your friend afterwards, feeling upset about the negative feedback you'd had. You could probably tell me exactly how it was phrased and what the person delivering that negative feedback was even wearing. It will feel really clear in your mind. Whereas if I asked you about the last piece of positive feedback you received, that might feel a little bit more, wishy-washy to you. You might be thinking, I'm not really sure it was positive feedback, or they were just saying that because they were being nice, or it was positive feedback about the team. It wasn't necessarily about me. We sometimes brush off the good stuff, and we replay the negative stuff more over and over in our brain because of this negativity bias. But the good news is that we can get around this by consciously deciding to focus more on the good stuff. And that's where this power of positivity and the importance of joy starts to come in. Yeah, I can see here in the chat box, you guys are saying most definitely negative too much. So true, every detail is really clear. And that is because we replay those moments, right? When something goes wrong, we almost torture ourselves with it a little bit and we replay it and think about it and analyze it and dissect it. Whereas we don't tend to do that with the positive stuff. We almost let the positive stuff just roll off us. So, I wanted to do a quick little exercise to sort of demonstrate to you how our minds work. So, what I want you to do is to take a quick couple of seconds, 20 seconds, let's say, and I want you to look around the room that you are in, wherever you are joining us from this evening. Look around the room that you are in and try to take in and absorb as much of that room as you can. Try to really see as much of what is in that room as possible. And I will, oh, sorry about that. I'll give you 20 seconds to do that now, to think about and to have a look around your room. Try and take in as much as you possibly can. And then once you have had chance to do that, I want you to look around the room that you are in again and try and take in as much as you can again. But this time, I only want you to focus on blue things. So, same process, just look around that room, but this time, instead of trying to take everything in, we are just focusing on the blue things. And then I would love to know if you saw anything different that second time around that you perhaps didn't see the first time around. Did you notice anything different? Was your attention drawn to anything that you perhaps missed the first time around, that you weren't conscious of the first time you looked around the room? And if you can just let me know in the chat box whether you managed to see anything different the second time that you did that exercise. Give it a couple of seconds because I think there's a little bit of a lag on the chat. Yep, Haley said notice lots of different things the second time. Sarah, didn't spot any of the blue things initially. Everything was different the second time. How odd. So this is really a little bit of an insight into how our brains work, because every single second our brains are exposed to millions of pieces of information, and yet we can only consciously process 40 pieces of information per second. So what our brains have to do is decide what it is going to make us conscious of. It can't make us conscious of all of these millions of pieces of information that we are being exposed to every single second, because we would just go mad. Our brains already feel too full just trying to process the 40 pieces of information that we can process per second. And so what they have to do is they have to decide to, think, what am I going to make you conscious of? What am I going to just, sort of send to your subconscious? And it does this via an automatic filtering process. And what happens is that automatic filtering process runs off information that it has previously had. So if you think the first time we look around the room, you probably took in quite a general glance. You might have focused on some of the big pieces of furniture in your room, or you might have been more drawn to things that feel particularly meaningful to you. If you've got a photograph, or you had just finished making the bed, you probably noticed the bed. You might be drawn to the things that your brain is essentially trying to work out what it thinks you want to be aware of. The second time around, we've given that filter in our brain a little bit of extra information. So we've helped it to understand what we want it to focus on. Those blue things were there the first time around, but our brain didn't know that that was what we were looking for. So it wasn't bringing it to our attention. And you might have had this experience before in action if you have ever booked a holiday somewhere, and suddenly you book a holiday and everywhere it looks like some, if we take Cornwall as an example, you might have booked a holiday to Cornwall, and you go on Instagram and you see that someone's in Cornwall, and then you go log onto the news and there's a news article about Cornwall, and then you go onto Facebook and someone's sharing something about Cornwall. It's not that more content has been created about that location, it's that you have told your brain, you have told your filter that you are interested in that piece of information. Similarly, you might have had the experience of buying a new car and suddenly seeing that car on the road everywhere. It's not that there are more of those cars out and about, it's that you have told your brain that that car is interesting to you. And so I always like to share this because I think it reminds us of why we need to be careful of what we're putting in that filter. If we treat life like, this big wide open to everything, chances are we're going to lean towards the things that have been that we've experienced in the past. And with that negativity bias, chances are we're going to lean more towards the negative. Our brain is going to spot the things that back up those negative viewpoints. And so it sort of highlights why we need to sort of shift to putting some more positive information in that filter. And you can see that a little more here on this next slide. Another bias to, we've talked about negativity bias, but another bias that our brains have is something called confirmation bias. And what that means is that essentially our brains will look for evidence of what we believe to be true. So whatever you believe to be true, your brain will be scanning and looking in that filter. It will be trying to find the pieces of evidence that back up your belief. And so if what you're believing is that things are going to be awful, nothing's going to work out, everything's really stressful, your brain is going to look for evidence of that. But if you believe that things are going to work out, that things are going to be really great, that you're really smashing everything and life is really good and really positive, your brain will also look for evidence and opportunities that back that up. Just like when we said we're going to focus on the blue things, we notice the blue things. If we choose to say we're going to focus on the good things, we start to notice more of the good things. And then we start to have all of those benefits that I mentioned earlier that come alongside feeling positive and feeling joyful. Yes, so as has said, would saying positive affirmations to yourself help with this? Absolutely. That is one of some of this research is used to actually validate positive affirmations and prove that they work. Some of you might have seen that in the classroom with your students and your pupils, is that reinforcing those positive affirmations, those words of affirmation, help children to feel more positive, to spot the things that they are doing well. And the same works for us as adults as well. The more we can put focus on the good, the more we start to spot the good. And yeah, positive affirmations are a great way to do that. And I'm going to share some other practical ways to do that throughout the rest of our session as well. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you all a question, and I wanted to ask you, as you're, either in this first or this second week of being back at school, I wanted you to think about what the most positive outlook you can have as you embark on this new school year. So some of you might have, and understandably so, tiptoed back into this new school year, feeling a little bit apprehensive, feeling a little bit nervous. You might be thinking about what could go wrong. What do we need to make up for from last year? How's this going to feel? And that negativity bias might have meant that we're looking at some of the negatives. We are risk assessing. We are trying to spot the things that we could go wrong. But instead, I wanted to give you a couple of minutes to do the opposite, to think about what could go right this year. What is the most positive outlook that you can have as you embark on the new school year? What potential does this year hold? What good could it hold? And I just want you to reflect on that for a minute or two. If you've got a notebook to hand, maybe jot down a few ideas. Just try to challenge yourself, try to challenge that negativity bias that we might have, and try and think about the most positive outcome that this year could have and the most positive outlook you can have as we embark on this new school year. And if anyone would like to share what their positive outlook or the positive outcomes could be in the chat, you're more than welcome to. Please don't feel obliged, but I always think it can be nice for other participants to perhaps see some of that positivity as well. So if you do feel inclined to share, please do. Yeah, Angela said the year ahead will be enjoyable. I love that. And it really does. I used to find that, so prior to retraining as a coach and a positive psychology practitioner, I actually used to work in corporate. So I worked for places like the Walt Disney Company and Hallmark Cards and did a whole variety of different roles at different head offices. But I always used to notice the difference between when I was driving to work on a Monday thinking this is going to be a really good week versus driving to work on a Monday thinking, I'm dreading this. It even just what we tell ourselves on that drive in can make the difference. Andrea said, a new job, new school. Yeah, really looking for the positives that can be found in that. Jackson has said, children feel happy and safe to challenge themselves, and I can rebalance work and life. Yeah, looking for some of that opportunity of where we can get back to normal, where we can start to move back to a more positive place. So, what I wanted to spend the rest of our time together focusing on are some really practical tools to help you prioritize joy and to avoid burnout. As someone has written in the chat a little bit earlier up, they have said, sometimes we forget about ourselves, we forget to care for ourselves. And so, what I wanted to do was to give you some really practical ways to do that this year and some inspiration, I suppose, because sometimes the hardest part is knowing what to do and knowing how to start. So that's what we're going to focus on for the next 15-20 minutes or so. So the first tip that I have for you all is to practice gratitude. And some of you might have come across some of the research on gratitude already. It's something that is talked about quite a lot. You can buy gratitude journals in Paperchase now. It's really hit the mainstream. But I always like to share it in these sorts of sessions because the research on gratitude is just so robust. The research shows that it improves our mental and physical health, it contributes to better sleep, it improves our relationships. But most importantly for me, what the research really shows with gratitude is that it is one of the biggest predictors of joy and contentment. a big piece of research that was done about 10 years, maybe even longer than that, maybe more like 12 years ago, showed that joyful people who identified as joyful, 99% of the time also identified as having a gratitude practice. So and sorry, before I go on, I what I want to say is I think that that makes sense. Sometimes we think, just like I said earlier on, we think if we're successful, we'll be happy. I think sometimes we think, well, if things are going well, if I feel happy, I'll be grateful. But actually, it's the other way round. When we focus on what we're thankful for, when we focus on what we have, what we appreciate, what is good about life, we feel happier because we're comparing less. We are enjoying what we have. We are really soaking in that present moment instead of constantly comparing and thinking about the future. It helps us to anchor into the here and now. So, what do I mean by having a gratitude practice? Essentially, I mean finding ways to focus on what we are thankful for. And there are tons of different ways that you can do this. Some people like to make gratitude lists. So, literally writing a list in the evening of a couple of things that went well that day or a couple of things they're feeling grateful for. Sometimes it can be about trying to savor. So, like, savor the moment when something beautiful is happening, trying to feel really grateful for it in that moment. So, you might have had the experience this summer of catching a sunset. We can practice gratitude by just in that moment thinking, gosh, I feel really lucky to have this moment. So it can be in that, respect. It could be something that you do with your classrooms. How can you bring some of this gratitude in? It can be saying a heartfelt thank you to a colleague. It can be, really taking time to notice what you love about your home or what you love about your job. It's just really bringing some attention to what we are thankful for so that we can be in that present moment, so that we can soak in the joy that comes with appreciating what we have, because we are so often trying to chase the next thing, trying to worry about the next thing on the to do list. And practicing gratitude just really anchors us in the here and now. The next thing that I wanted to share, this was a tip that really got me through all of the many lockdowns, and that is focusing on what you can control. Like I said earlier, we are skilled risk assessors. We are always looking for the next risk that is on the horizon. And what that means is that when things are uncertain, we often focus on what isn't in our control and we can start to panic. So we can start to think, well, what is going to happen this winter? What is going to happen, with exams? How are they going to mark this thing? When might Ofsted come? We can start to think about all of these things that we don't have any say over, we don't have any control over. And what that means is that we are expending energy on something that, that energy can't change. It doesn't matter how many news articles we read or how much we worry about some things. If they're not in our control, that energy is never going to be a positive use of time. And so, what can really help if you found yourself in that situation where you're starting to worry, where you're perhaps getting drawn into what could happen? Something that can help is to turn your attention to what you can control. It helps us to feel calmer, it helps us to feel more grounded, and it helps us to feel a little bit more in control and feel a little bit more anchored. So, I want you to think about how you can make the very best of whatever this school year throws at you. Instead of trying to control what the year is going to look like, how can you take what is thrown at you and make the best of it? I think those of us who have perhaps coped best with the last couple of years have tried to do this. We've tried to go, do you know what? I can't control what's happening in the world, but I can control how I'm going to show up today. And it's remembering that you always have that choice. You might not be able to, um, you don't know what is going to happen in this next school year, but what you can control is how you show up for yourself, how you show up for your colleagues, how you show up for your pupils and your students, how you show up for your communities. And I just wanted to remind you of that. This is something that I actually have written on a post-it note and I have it stuck to my laptop screen. It just literally says focus on what you can control, so that when I can feel my brain maybe starting to panic or thinking about what lies around the corner, it brings me back into pouring that energy into something I can control. So My next tip, this is one of my favorites, is to spread some joy to others. So we all know, right? We've all had the experience that doing good helps us to feel good. When we donate to charity, when we volunteer our time, when we help out a colleague, when we buy a beautiful present for someone, we get a lovely feeling as well. They benefit from, your good deed, but we also get that good feeling. And that's why I love it, because it feels win-win. There's benefit in it for everyone. And so what I would love to encourage you to take a couple of minutes to do, and this is one where I really would love to see any ideas that you've got in the chat box, is to make a list of ways that you can spread joy within your school or classroom and share them. Share them with your colleagues, share them with your students, and share them with us here as well, so that we can inspire each other. How could you spread joy? Is it about, helping to put a bit of a gratitude practice in with your you know within your classroom? Is it about, trying to be a little bit more kind? Is it about trying to say those heartfelt thank yous? How is it that you can spread some joy within your school or classroom or community? And any ideas you've got, I'd love to hear in the chat box. Yeah, and as Haley has said, teachers, you are the most wonderful joy spreaders to your classes every day. As someone who has got a nephew who is very, very excited about his first day at school tomorrow, I can attest to that. He's met his teacher and he thinks she is just the most wonderful human on the planet. Andrea, yep, sharing your coffee when they run out. Yeah, I love that, like bringing some of that, spreading that joy into the staff room. Something that really worked for a company that I did some work with last year was they did this thing called Good News Friday, where when they had a meeting at the end of the week, they all brought a piece of good news. So it could be from their personal life or their professional life, but just ending that week on a high, of sort of saying, what did we do well this week? What has gone well? What's a piece of good news? Help them to feel more connected, help them to spread some joy, like leaving post-it notes of the sugary treat and positive praise for colleagues. Yeah, sometimes we don't get that positive praise. We are all so busy that we don't get to hear that. So I love that idea. Yeah, and as I said, something simple like genuinely just asking how someone is, taking that time to listen, or helping with taking down displays, making a cup of tea, quick post-it note, all just, things that can feel small, but actually, given these pressured circumstances that we're existing under, can make such a huge difference. That heartfelt, how are you? That cup of tea, that post-it note, they can totally turn around someone's day, and you will feel good as well. So, another thing that can really help is checking in regularly. I know how busy you guys are. I know how intense it can be to work in the environments that you guys work in. And what that often means is that we can't spot a problem until it's become a big problem. So, what I really like about taking some time to check it in is that it helps us to notice how you are feeling, helps you to tune in to any symptoms or signs of burnout or worry or anxiety before they become a big problem. Because often what happens, and you can let me know in the chat box if anyone has had this experience, is we just keep going, plowing on, and then suddenly there becomes a day where something tiny leaves us in tears, where a small niggle can leave you sort of run into the staff room feeling all, irate or upset. And that is because, there might have been these little symptoms, there might have been these little signs on the way that we haven't been able to spot because we've just been on autopilot. We've just been keeping going. And so I wanted to share a couple of little prompts that could help, and you can use these however regularly you want to. I've suggested on a weekly basis, but it could be something that you do monthly or every other week. It doesn't have to take a huge amount of time. I know that you guys are time poor and you don't always have tons of time for this stuff. So it can be something that You don't even have to write this stuff down. You can just be asking yourself it on the commute to work, or you could check in with somebody else in the staff room and ask them. But these are the three questions that I really like to use. The first is what went well this week. So, maybe as you're driving home on a Friday afternoon, what went well this week? How can you tune into what you did really well? How can you give yourself some praise for getting through the week, or for delivering that great lesson, or for dealing with that, pastoral problem in a really great way? What felt challenging? What felt hard this week? What perhaps isn't working? Noticing those things means you can start to make a change. You can start to change things before they become a problem. And then finally, what can help me next week? What might I need to change next week to make things run a little bit more smoothly? This can take 5 minutes of your time, but it can make a huge difference, because when we put awareness on something, then we can start to make a change. We can't change it if we're not aware of it. And that's when things start to build up. That's when things start to feel overwhelming, and where we start to reach that point of burnout. So, my last little tip for you all before I move on to some practical ways of putting this into action is, it's a model that I wanted to talk to you about called the demands versus resources model. And this it's one of the most researched methods for avoiding burnout, or for recovering from burnout, and particularly for recovering from occupational burnout. So burnout that is caused by work. And the idea behind the demands versus resources model is that life is about balance. And what we should be thinking about is, the more demands that we have, the more things that are taking up time, the more things that are being asked of us, the more resources we need to help with that. And so the way I like to think about this, demands versus resources sounds quite like, it sounds a little bit like, what even is that? And so the way I like to think about it is that the demands are the things that drain our energy, the things that take energy away from us. They're not necessarily negative things. They might be things that we really love doing. You might love being at the front of your classroom and teaching. It might be your passion and your purpose in life, but it can still drain our energy. So demands are the things that take energy away from us, and resources are the things that help us to build that energy back up. And often, when we are thinking about managing or avoiding burnout, or we are thinking about managing stress, we put all of our energy into thinking about how we reduce the demands placed on us. And that is, a really valid way for dealing with burnout, is to think about, how can I maybe take some things off the to do list? How can I take some things off my plate? But we also know that that isn't always possible. Life throws curveballs at us. Life throws flipping pandemics at us, which mean that we can't always just say, actually, I'm not going to do that this week. Sometimes we have to show up, we have to do the thing in order to be able to deliver for other people. So, in those times, the thing that can help is to increase the amount of resources. So, I want you to really think about the things that energize you, the things that support you. And I want you to think, sometimes the best way to think about this is to think about, when you are at your best, what are you doing? So when you feel like you're at your very, very best, what are the activities you are doing? What are the routines that you are in? What are the things that you are prioritizing? And I want you to take a couple of minutes to make a list and to get some ideas down on paper. So, it might be things like exercise, getting enough sleep, talking to a friend, using your time at lunch to do something that feels joyful to you. It might be reading, it might be spending less time on your phone, all of these things. Think about, when you are at your best, what are you doing? What are the things that energize and support you? And what I want you to start to think about as we move into this new school year is, how can you make sure that the amount of demands you have is matched by the amount of resources? Because often what happens, and what I've seen happen for a lot of people, myself included, in the last year or so, is that as the demands go up, as things get more stressful, as people need more from us, as we are having to adapt, what usually happens is that we drop the resources. We don't get enough sleep, we don't eat very well, we're not prioritizing exercise, because we're putting all of our energy into these demands. But if you think about it in that way of energize and drain, we can't just keep draining. At some point, we've got to refuel. And so, if we think about as the demands go up, so too need to the resources, we can start to maintain that level of energy. We're not going through this up, down, burnout, like boom and bust cycle. We can keep things equal. So take a couple of minutes to jot down some ideas. If anyone, again, would like to share any, please do pop them in the chat box. Things like gratitude practice and focusing on what you can control could be resources here as well. But having a bit of a list means that when you're coming into a busy week, when things are feeling tough, when you're in that, last week before the half term or before the holidays and things are feeling really like, you're running on empty, you have a list of things that you can check in with and that you can do to help build that energy back up. Yeah, Haley has mentioned just on that checking in point that writing down what went well, writing down what had gone well that week was huge for her, and checking at the end of the week made her realize how hard she was on herself sometimes. It's so easy, if we think back to that negativity bias I mentioned earlier on, so much easier to focus on what we didn't do well. We often leave, school or work on a Friday afternoon thinking about the things on the to-do list that didn't get ticked off. We very rarely look at like the 100 things that we did tick off. And so that checking in can help to rebalance that. And that also could be a thing that energizes you as well, is noticing and celebrating what you are achieving instead of always just focusing on what is next. Some other things that can help in terms of those resources, in terms of building that energy, think about whether you are an introvert or whether you're an extrovert. Do you get your energy from being around other people, or do you get your energy from being alone? That can help you think about, what resources are going to help you. Is it that you need like to go for a coffee with a friend? Is it that you need a phone call with a friend or a loved one to really re-energize you? Or is it that you need some solo time, that you need to read and have a nice bath or get outside? And also thinking about things that have helped you during difficult periods of life. So, like time out in nature always really helps for me. So I know that if I've got a busy week, trying to find half an hour here and there to go for a walk can really help. Yeah, Andrea said sleep and time to myself. Yeah, that solitude can be really re-energizing. And as I said, I need to bring back my joy for reading and fiction. Real life can take a back seat for a moment. Yes, I love this. This was like my number one survival. Apologies if you can hear that dog barking. My number one survival method during the like worst bit of the pandemic last year was reading stories and getting lost in other people's stories, because you're not then like picking up your phone, you're not thinking about your to-do list, you're just so absorbed in something else. So any way that you can sort of get into that mode can really help. Yeah, Sarah said family time, really just thinking about what re-energizes you and having a bit of a list and giving yourself permission to prioritize those things, because they're going to help you show up better for other people. They're going to help you avoid that burnout. They are going to help you keep delivering with the energy that I know you want to deliver with and I know that you value. This fresh back to school energy that you might be feeling right now, how do we maintain that right up until, that last week before Christmas? Yeah. Coffee and cake with a friend, happy kids at home, time to wind down with loved ones. These are all the things that we should be peppering throughout our week and really taking time to prioritize. So, before I start to wrap up, and I will do that in a minute or so I can answer any questions that you might have, I just wanted to share 3 little tips on staying the course with some of this stuff. Hopefully, this has given you some ideas. It's helped you to understand, why joy is so important, and it's given you some ideas to put that into action. But we all know that, we can watch something like this, we can take part in a workshop like this, and we can then, we can feel all energized and inspired, and then life happens, the next day happens and we forget all about it. And so I just wanted to share some little tips that might help you take this with you and implement it and keep it going moving forward. So, first of all, I want you to consider what could get in the way, because let's face it, something always does get in the way. But if we consider what that thing might be, we can start to plan for it. If we know that when we're tired, we're less likely to prioritize ourselves, we can put a plan in place for that. We can ask someone to hold us accountable. We can make taking care of ourselves as easy as possible. If we know that, there is a certain situation at work that makes us think really negatively, we can make sure that we have 5 minutes after that meeting to switch back into a positive gear, or that we can read, a positive affirmation. We can do something that helps us change that. So think about what could get in the way for you in terms of implementing some of this stuff, and try to plan for that. My next tip is to take some sort of action, like right now, off the back of this workshop this evening, that sort of, helps you put this stuff into practice. So that might be to grab a notebook and write your first gratitude list. It might be to book in a, gym class next week so that you can keep your energy levels topped up. It might be to drop a text to your colleagues and say, hey, shall we try and do Good News Friday this week? Doesn't matter what it is, but take some form of action this evening or tomorrow morning, because that's then going to help you to start building momentum. Once we've taken that first action, that momentum starts to build behind us and everything else feels a little bit easier. And finally, don't be afraid to communicate your needs. Think about that, keeping your demands and your resources in balance. What might you need from other people to help with that? Do you need your partner to pull their weight more around the house? Do you need a colleague to help you with some stuff? Do you need, to be able to access different resources? What is it that you need to keep you feeling good this year? Because you prioritizing your joy and you avoiding burnout, that benefits everybody around you. So, thank you so much for having me this evening, everyone. Like I said, there's some time now for some questions if anyone has got them. You can also come and find me. I think Hayley mentioned earlier on my podcast, Practical Positivity, short little 10, 20-minute episodes with even more of this sort of stuff that I've been talking about. And you can also come and find me over on Instagram as well, where I share lots of, again, bite-sized practical tips, because I really believe in putting this stuff into action. If you've got any questions now, please do let me know about anything that I've talked about, or anything that I might be able to help with as you are navigating this this new school year. Oh, I would. We've got a question here. What are your favorite positive affirmations you would recommend? So, what I always recommend is to actually think about what you want the positive affirmation to do. So, what is it that you are trying to change? Is it that you want to feel more confident, and therefore your affirmation might be, I am confident. I always do a great job. I succeed in the things I try my hand at. Is it that, you want to feel more organized, and you might create an affirmation about that? So I would say get clear on what the change is that in your mindset that you're trying to create. And then there are three things that we should always do with affirmations. So they should be positive. Sometimes when I work with clients, they're tempted to sort of say, like, I'm okay at, or I am fine at. We don't want that. We want them to be positive. We want them to be, I'm great at, or I am good at. They should be present. So they should always be written in the present tense. So not I want to be or I will be, but I am. And they should also be inspiring. So they should create some sort of emotional response in you. So it should be something, yeah, that feels really exciting and inspiring to you. And if you take those three things of positive, present, and inspiring, then the affirmation will do its job.
Oh, that is a great tip. I love that one.
Yeah, I think so often we want to sort of like take other people's, and I mean, if you Google positive affirmations, you'll find hundreds, but they're more powerful if they feel really connected to what you want and the change you want to make.
Definitely. For those of you that have mentioned wanting to prioritise time for reading, Sophie always shares really good book recommendations on her Instagram stories as well, but beware, it might impact your bank balance, because it definitely has with mine sometimes. I'm always quite glad when I see something on your stories. I'm like, I've actually got that already.
I've read that one already. Yeah, it's something that up until a couple of years ago, I just never did. Like I loved reading when I was a kid, and then I stopped. And it's like I said, because it's such like it feels like an almost mindful time for me, in that like I don't check my phone, check my emails, worry about what I need to do. You can just get absorbed in it, and that's why it's become like my go-to like self-care habit is to just pick up a book.
Definitely. As says her to be read list is insanely big already. I need to get through them then, and you can keep adding to it then. It's all good. I think some of these things, it's just a case of getting yourself into like a habit and a bit of a routine with things, isn't it? Because I know that I'm much better at doing things like in the morning, but it's so easy to just be like, oh, I'm a little bit tired today, I'm going to press snooze, and then that's when the habits all start to drop off. So when I'm a lot more strict with myself and say, no, get up, you can read a couple of chapters of your book with a coffee, like prioritizing that time for myself definitely works better. But you do have to be quite firm on yourselves when you first get started, don't you? I think.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like that sort of question of, when you are at your best, what are you doing? Because sometimes like getting up early to read a chapter before work feels like a punishment. It's like, no, I want to sleep in. I want to, I want to snooze the alarm. And when you remember that actually this is a way of being my best, and what being your best helps you to do, that motivation starts to build a little bit.
Definitely.
Jackson has said, you have an incredible home studio. Do you use music as a resource? No, I mentioned at the beginning briefly, you might have missed it, that I'm married to a musician. So unfortunately, I can't play any of these guitars behind me or use any of the equipment. But I suppose I do really enjoy music. And I think what I do use is like creativity as a resource. So for me, that doesn't involve playing an instrument, but it might involve like writing or using my creativity in different ways, like lots of like crafts and stuff, and not stuff that I'm particularly great at, but that is absorbing and that builds that energy in a different way.
Definitely. Has anyone got any more questions for lovely Sophie while she's here? I'm sure you'll have all taken loads of tips from that. Loads of lovely little bits to think about for sure.
I think like the one last thing that I would encourage everyone to do is to, we talked there about that check-in of what's gone well week to week. But another thing that might be nice to do as you start this new school year is just like looking at what you achieved in the last school year, because like I can hand on heart say that you guys are some of the most resilient, adaptable, like, you've had to be continually positive, and you've shown up for, your pupils and your colleagues and your communities in that way. And I think I almost certainly know, because I've worked with teachers in my one-to-one coaching practice before. Like I said, my sister's a teacher. I've got a few friends who are, and I know that you perhaps don't always give yourselves credit for what you are doing and what you are achieving every day. So maybe take some time to think about that, and to focus on what you are doing a really great job of and what difference you're already making.
I bet you're all really good at working out what your children have done well. So now you need to turn it back on yourselves and give yourselves a little bit of credit. You'll all be amazing at being able to praise your children. So now you need to do it yourself, which is definitely harder.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, what's one small thing we can do tonight to make a start? So maybe focusing on what you're already doing really well. Maybe making a little list of 3 things that you're grateful for today. Be as specific as you can with that. We could sometimes want to say, oh, I've got a house and I've got a job, and we can be quite broad, but be really specific. It might be like I had a really cracking cup of tea this morning and I drank it at the perfect temperature, or I managed to get half an hour in the garden when I got home from work, or whatever that specific thing might be. And the other thing is like maybe plan for that future you. So you will know from the rhythms and routines of previous years when might be your like weak spot, when might be the time when you feel really burnt out and tired. Think about that person in the future, and plan something, plan a resource for that week. So if like the week before October half term, you always feel knackered, like block out your evenings that week for just, doing something for you, or put something in that weekend that's going to feel really energizing to you. Try and think ahead and think about that. Just as, again, you all have that incredible skill of planning ahead for your lessons in your classroom. Think about what you might need in that future time as well.
Great. Any more questions from anyone? They're all really good questions. I've learned lots from those and your answers as well.
And if anyone does have any other questions, like, you can see my Instagram handle there. Please do feel free to come and drop me a DM, or sometimes it's only when you get off a call like this that you think, oh, like, I hadn't thought about that, or I wish I'd asked that. So
that's me.
Having a chat.
I always do that. Fab. Well, thank you so much, Sophie. I cannot thank you enough. I knew it was going to be a really fabulous live, but I think you all have given so many people some really, really great inspiration there. So thank you so much for joining us. We are very, very grateful, and I'm sure you'll get lots of new followers over on Instagram as well. But thank you everyone for spending your Wednesday evening with us. I hope the rest of your school week goes really, really well. And as always, if you ever need anything from any of us at Twinkle, do jump into any of our groups and we are happy to help with anything. So do come over and talk to us at any point. But thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening and enjoy writing some gratitude now. Go and write some things down. Find yourself a new notebook. Or go buy one. That's a nice way to add to your resources. Thanks everyone. Take care.